Be'ezras Hashem. Today's daf is daf Chav Beis. It's not a long daf. It's actually a short daf today, and we are beginning just about 9 lines from the bottom of Chaf Aleph and Beis. So to visualize what we're talking about, I put on the screen over here is a very simple question, and Sheldon pointed it out last night that we actually discussed this question when we were learning Masechta Nedarim. Basically, when a husband is mefer his wife's neder, right? If he's mefer, he blocks or nullifies his wife's neder. What does that mean? One view is, as we see here, he uproots it. He's oiker it. What does that mean? Let's say she said, I want to be a Nazir, and day number 15, the husband hears that his wife is a Nazir, so he says, you're mefer. So then he uproots the whole thing, and it's as if he wasn't a Nazir all this time. So certainly afterwards, she's not a Nazir. But even prior to that, he uproots the neder from the very beginning. That other way to learn pshat is, what does the husband do? And this is where we're going to go here, is the husband doesn't uproot the neder. It's not like when you go to a rabbi and he's mater the neder, he uproots the neder because he says, oh, you made a mistake when you made this neder. So the neder becomes undone from the very beginning. And not so when a husband is made for his wife's neder. When his wife made the neder and on day 15 he hears about it, so it turns out from day 1 to 15 she was actually a Nazir, and then from 15 and onwards she's not a Nazir. That is the question of the Gemara. Question of the Gemara is that does a husband mefer the neder, he uproots the neder, or does a husband cut the neder from the middle of the neder? So that so the Gemara asks a question: Lamai nafkamina? What's the difference? Oh, it's a big nafkamina. Let's say a woman said, "I want to be a Nazir," right? And another woman, let's say another woman, will put her right over here. Another woman says, "I want to be like her." So, and then it turns out that the husband was made for the neder. If you learn that when a husband is made for the neder, he uproots the neder. So now, this lady is not a neder, is not a Nazir anymore, and number 2 is not a Nazir because it turns out she was linking herself to a woman that's not a Nazir. But if you learn that the husband is only cutting the neder when he's made for it, he just stops it. But it turns out this woman was actually a Nazir from day 1 till day 15 when the husband was made for the neder. So if another woman said, I want to be like this lady, if she says that, well, even after the husband is made for the neder, the lady number 1 is no more a Nazir, but lady number 2 remains a Nazir because she linked herself onto a woman that was actually a Nazir. So the Gemara is asking this question: how does the mechanics work when a husband's made for his wife's neder? Is he uprooting the neder as if it never happened, or is he cutting it from now and onwards? So let's see the Gemara, Chaf Aleph on the base, about 9 lines from the bottom. Tashima coming here, very simple. Ha'isha shenadar b'nazar. A woman makes a neder that she wants to be a nazir. Okay, he's a nazir. And then she drinks wine and touched a dead body. She should get malchus. What do you mean? You're a nazir and you're drinking wine or touching a dead body? You get malchus. So the Gemara doesn't understand. What's this case talking about? A woman became a nazir and did all this. There's no novelty to that. Hey chidami, what's the story over here? Do you say it's a woman, that regular woman that the husband did not nullify that neder? She's a nazir and she drinks wine and metam l'mesim. We tell us that she gets malchus. So the Gemara says, do I need you to tell me that? Of course she gets malchus, because the husband didn't block the Naziris, and therefore she's a Nazir. So she violated the Naziris, certainly she should get malchus. El Pshitit must be talking about the Heiful Abal, that the husband nullified the neder. Now, and therefore she, let's say, up until the husband nullified the neder, she drank wine and touched the dead body. So then she's a Nazir. Then she's a Nazir when she was metam l'meisim and she drank. If you want to say that the husband uproots the neder, and she was never a nazir, then amai sefeges abon. Why were you clapping her, giving her malchus? Even if she violated the naziris, she's violating the naziris when she's not a nazir anymore at the green point because her husband was oiker the neder. Elalav shmamino, it must be approved. Baal megiz gayas. The husband actually cuts the neder. From here on, you're no more nazir. But up until the husband was made for the neder, she was actually a nazir. That's the proof. Answers the Gemara, really, I can tell you, Baal mi'ika okar. The husband uproots the neder. And therefore, the Reisha is talking about where the husband did not made for the neder. Okay? And therefore, you're going to ask me, what's the novelty of that? If the husband did not made for the neder, what's the chiddush? She's a nazir, of course. If she's metamala mesim or drinks wine, she gets malchus. Answers the Gemara, Mishum de Ketani Sefer. Since the end of the Brisa wants to say a case, Heifer labal, if the husband did mefer, let's say the husband was mefer the neder, and vihi la yada, she didn't hear about it, that her husband, she thinks that she's still a nazir. And she's drinking wine and metama to mesim. The Mishnah, the Brisa says, she doesn't get malchus because her husband was made for the neder. Because really, she's actually not a nazir. The husband was made for the neder. She doesn't know that. She thinks she is a nazir, and yet if she drinks wine and it's metama mesim, she doesn't get malchus. And the chiddush of that is that she doesn't even get malchus to Rabbanan, because she doesn't get malchus at all. There is an opinion, Rabbi Yehuda, who says that she would get malchus. Because if you're thinking that you're a nazir, even though you're not a nazir, but you're doing an aveira, you should get malchus. The chiddush is she doesn't even get malchus midrabanan. So since the end of the brisa talks about heifer law, that the husband was mefer, the beginning of the brisa could be talking about when the husband did not mefer the neder. There's no chiddush, fine, there's no chiddush, but it wants to make it two cases in the brisa. That's why we go to Amid Aleph, Taner Namid Reisha, Sefegis. The case of the beginning of the brisa is talking about where she does get malchus, is talking about a case where the husband did not mefer the neder. So we still don't resolve this question of the husband oiker, or is the husband megiz gayas, cutting it off. So Tashima, come in here. Ha'isha shenadar nazir. A woman makes a neder that she wants to be a nazir. Okay, v'nitmas, and then she became tameh. Now, when you become tameh, that you made a neder and you a nazir and you became tameh, you have to bring 3 karbanas: a bird, chatas ha'of, a oilas ha'oif, that's a bird oif, and a karbanashim, an animal for a karbanashim, kevis for a karbanashim. So what happened? A woman made a neder that she became to be a nazir, and then she became tameh. And then the husband nullified that neder. So the Brisa says, she still has to get a kapara. She has to bring a chatas oif, but she doesn't need to bring the oilas oif. Now, if the husband was made for the neder, right, and made for the neder, turns out she was not a nazir. So therefore, it's understood why she doesn't bring an oilas oif. Because if you think Baal Megas guy is that the husband only cuts the neder from this time on and onwards, but she really was a nazir up until that time. So then if she was matama herself in this point, right, from day 1 to day 15, right? So if you say that, then why is she not bringing the oilas ha'oif, right? If she's really a nazir from day 1 to day 15, then she really should bring an oilas ha'oif. So therefore, teisinam oilas ha'oif. So it must be that the husband is oiker the neder, and he uproots it from the very beginning. So she turns out she wasn't a nazir. That's precisely why she's not going to bring an oilas ha'oif. So the Gemara asks, ve'elamai, it must be that you're thinking that this brisa holds me'ikar akar, that a husband does uproot the neder, right? If he uproots the neder, that's why she doesn't have to bring an oilas ha'oif, and probably she doesn't have to bring the asham either. So that makes sense. But why is she bringing a chatas ha'oif? The brisa does say that she should bring a chatas ha'oif, a bird for a chatas, but she wasn't a nazir. So why she became tamei, but she turned out that her husband was mefer, and she was not a nazir. So why does she bring a katas oif? Katas oif nami loitesi. She shouldn't bring a katas oif at all. And Mara hachinami. It's true. She should not have to bring a katas oif. But her money. But who does her brisa go like? Rabbi Loza HaKapor. This Rabbi Loza HaKapor. He's saying that since she was like, I don't know if she was a Nazir. It turns out she was not a Nazir, but she was acting like a Nazir, and becoming a Nazir is somewhat of an Aveira, because when you become a Nazir, you're prohibiting yourself on drinking wine, and Hashem doesn't like when you prohibit yourself something that you're not that you're permitted to do. And therefore, if you the fact that you became a Nazir and actually became Tameh, it's still okay to bring a carbon Katas just for that Aveira alone, that you made yourself into a Nazir. Where do we see this? Rabbi Loza HaKappa holds that becoming a Nazir is doing an Aveira. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, Rabbi Loza HaKappa Biribi. It's supposed to be Biribi. The great Rabbi Loza HaKappa, this special person, said, Ma Talmud Loima. What does the Torah say? That a Nazir has to bring a carbon Katas when he becomes Tameh, and that's a Chatas miyashachata, to forgive himself from the sin al hanafesh that he did against his soul. Now, what does it say? That you did a sin against your soul. What did you do against your soul? Aveira. What do you have to stress? That it was a sin against the soul. How did he make a sin against his soul by becoming a Nazir? The answer is because you decided to deprive yourself from wine, you caused a chayta. Anytime you deprive yourself from something that Hashem says it's okay, that's called a sinner. But like dvaram kal v'choyma, and make a kal v'choyma. Mazesh loitzir etzmoy element ayayin. If you don't be mitzar, if you didn't be mitzar yourself only from wine, you'd only a Nazir is only depriving himself from wine. Nikra chayta, he's called a sinner. Al achas hamitzar atzmei mikol davar. If someone becomes an ascetic, a monk, or a minimalist, right, an aesthetic lifestyle, and he deprives himself from everything in life, alachas kama v'kama, he's certainly called a sinner, and that's why you bring a chatas oif, even though she's not really a Nazir. Now you have to understand the context that Rabbi Loza HaKappa is saying. I think it's like the in the beginning of the Christian religion, where there was a lot of upstart people who joined and liked the idea of just being celibacy and monk-like, and depriving yourself from all God's gift to the world, and therefore Rabbi Loza HaKappa derived from the Nazir that doing such and leading such a lifestyle is called a sin against the soul. I will point out to you that if you look up Wikipedia on Rabbi Loza HaKappa, they actually bring a picture of this. This is called a lintel. This is was on the door of some ancient building, where it says Beis Medrash of Rabbi Loza HaKappa. There's this this was the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Loza HaKappa. So it's it's almost like 1,700 years old. Very old, unique find that they found that he actually existed, and they knew that he has a shul. So that's what it says. Anyway, that's the Gemara. So again, what I think what the Gemara already brought here is that the Gemara decided that it makes most sense to say that brisa holds that a Baal is me'ekar okar. He actually uproots the neder. That's why you don't bring an oilas oif. But the Gemara deals with how do you bring a chatas oif. So that seems to be the solution, that a husband is uprooting the neder. But the Gemara doesn't remain with that. Tashima, come in here. The Tanya Behedya, we learned the Beferish Brisa that actually argues on that and says a husband megas gayas. The Tanya, we learned the Brisa, the Isha Shenadra Benazir, a woman makes a neder that she wants to be a Nazir. V'shama chaverta v'amra v'ani, and her friend says, I want to be like you, right? Uba bala shel rishayna v'heifilah, and the first husband of the first one the woman that made a neder that she wants to be a Nazir, and her husband came and nullified her neder, her hemitaris, she's not a Nazir anymore. The chaverta asura, but her friend remains asur, because when she decided to become Nazir, she was linking herself actually to a Nazir. So when this husband was mefer, the husband number one was mefer his wife's neder, it's only from day 15 and on, she's not a Nazir anymore. But she linked herself on that I want to be a Nazir, just like during the time when woman number one was a Nazir. So from here you see that Baal Megas guys, the husband doesn't uproot the neder at all. He actually cuts the neder in half. Shma mina, Baal Megas guys, the husband actually cuts the neder in half and doesn't uproot the neder. Unlike Heter Chachamim, which actually uproots the neder. Rav Shimon just adds a point. If she said, now here she's saying something different. She said, if a woman said, instead of saying the word va'ani, and I want to be like you, he says, hareini kamaisech, I want to be exactly like you. Well, what it basically is saying is that the second woman is saying, I'm going to be a nazir only if you stay the course, and your husband is not made for you. And if it turns out that your husband was made for you, then you were not a nazir in the first place, then I'm not a nazir. So then, shtei mutaris. Then you have a possibility that even the second woman is going to be mutar. If she made a condition that she's only going to remain a nazir only if the first woman remains a nazir, well, if the first woman's husband nullified her neder, that means it turns out the second woman didn't actually make a neder. She didn't make a neder. Therefore, both of them are mutar. We go to Chaf Beis and Beis. Marzutra. Bereid Rav Mari, Omar, Hi Hainid Rab Choma. Mabzut Rav Mari, that this question of a woman said va'ani. Now, when a woman says va'ani, and when a woman says ani, and then the husband of the first one was made for her, even if you hold Baal Megas Gaius, could be that she's saying va'ani, I want to be like the end result of what's going to be with the first lady. Not that she's linking herself, like in this picture, she's linking herself to the time that she's a nazir. Maybe she says va'ani means I want to be like whatever she's going to be. And if she turns out that the end result, she's not a nazir, maybe this woman number two is not a nazir. So there's another way to look at it. So the boy Rami Bachama, Rami Bachama had a similar question. Harei alai, a person says, like, let's say, he wants to say that this piece of bread should be kibsar zevach shlomim, like this piece of meat of shlomim meat. Now, this shlomim meat was slaughtered meat that they did not yet sprinkle the blood on the mizbeah. Well, till they sprinkle the blood of this shlomim on the mizbeah, one's not permitted. It's holy meat. You can't eat it. Once you sprinkle the blood on the mizbeah, it becomes mutter meat that you're allowed to bring it home as long as you eat it in Yerushalayim. So if a man said on a slaughtered piece of shlomim meat, he says that this bread should be like this shlomim meat that was not yet sprinkled the water. What did he mean to say that this bread should be like the shlomim meat? Mahu. He matvis inish. When does a person latch a bread onto the meat is bi'ikara matvis. When it is in its original state. In its original state, it's not permitted meat, because as long as they did not yet sprinkle the blood, although they're going to do it, but they didn't do it yet. So therefore, when he says my bread should be like the shlomim meat, he's making his bread usser, just like the meat of the shlomim, which is usser prior to the sprinkling. Oidilma maybe bitsnana matvis. Snana means when it cools down. That's when the meat becomes cool, so to speak. That's a way of saying when the meat becomes mutter. And when he's saying my bread should be like this piece of meat, he's not saying that the bread should be like the piece of meat when it's usser. The bread should be like the piece of meat when it eventually becomes mutter, and which is after they sprinkle the blood, and then the meat becomes mutter. Therefore, the bread is mutter. So what did this guy try to latch on? So that's the same question over here by the woman. When a person says, one woman says, I want to be a nazir, right? And then day 15, her husband was made for, etc. When the second woman in the beginning of her naziris said, Va'ani, I want to be like you, did she mean to be only like her during the first part when she's a Nazir, or maybe she meant to say va'ani means I want to be like you, and what's eventually going to happen to you. And could be what eventually happened to woman number one. It turns out she was not a Nazir, so the woman number two won't be a Nazir. So this is a similar question. So the Gemara says, not so similar. Mi dami. By the Shlomim, it's always going to be Aser. Why? Hasam over there, because the Gemara is going to say now that even after you sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach, the piece of meat, of Shlomim meat, has halachas to it. You can't just bring it outside Yerushalayim, and you have a limited time of eating it. So it's holy meat. So whether you say, it doesn't matter, the bread, if you link it to the Shlomim meat, will always be Aser. Hasam, Kevin the Oma Halea like gemsara zevach Shlomim, when you say your bread should be like this meat of Shlomim meat, afagav de la'achash nizr dame, even after you sprinkle the blood, matzi achale b'chutz, you're still permitted to eat it, although you're permitted to eat it outside the base of Migdash, but Migdash Kaddish, it's still holy meat because you only have, you can only eat it for a limited period of time, and it has to be within Yerushalayim. So therefore, it's always going to be Aser. Avahacha over here, if you want to say that she's perhaps linking herself on to the end of the Naziris of the first woman, at the end of the day, the first husband was nullified her neder, and therefore she was not a Nazir anymore. So it could be the second woman will also not be a Nazir. So that's what the Gemara says. It's not a compared case to the question of Rami Bachama. And it is exactly the same case of Rami Bachama, certainly. Okay, so that's the way that Gemara ends. Now the Gemara just goes on to one more point on this matter. What happens? The first woman says Hareini Nazira, and then the second woman says Hareini Nazira bi'ikvayich. I want to be a Nazira like ikvayich. Now you know what Akev means, footsteps. I want to be a Nazir and following your footsteps. Or bi'ikvayich means because of you, I'm a Nazir. What did she mean? Mahu, what does this word ikvayich mean? The second woman. Hareini, because the first woman turned out that her husband was made for the neder. Hare, did she mean Hare be ikvayich? I want to be following your footsteps, bikula milsa. And whatever is going to happen to you, that should happen to me. If it turns out, Miss Woman number one, that you are going to be mutter because your husband was made for the neder, then woman number two says, I want to be in your footsteps. I want to be exactly like you. Visharya, and she's permitted. Or maybe you will say, Kimekame delay for labala basira. When she said bikvayich means I want to be a Nazir because of you. Bikvayich means because of you. And therefore, who cares what's going to happen to woman number one? Woman number two says, I want to be a Nazir because of you. And since for a limited period of time, woman number one was a Nazir, she's also a Nazir. Tashima, come in here. Isha shenadra b'nazir. A woman says that she wants to be a Nazir. V'shama bala, and the husband said, honey, you're going to be a Nazir? Her husband said, "Va'ama ani, I want to be like you. I'll also be a Nazir." Eina yochel lahafer. He cannot nullify the neder. Now, so basically, because the Gemara understands, why can't the husband nullify that neder? Because if he nullifies the neder, he also will become mutter, right? But because ani means, which is same thing, bikvayach means I want to follow your footsteps. So by nullifying her neder, well, if he said I'm going to follow your footsteps, he's basically undoing his own commitment to be a Nazir. And a person cannot release himself from a Nazir. He has to go to a rabbi. So therefore, we don't allow this person to make for his neder. But if you thought the opposite way, when you say Hareini, I want to follow you, you're saying that I want to follow you the way you were originally, the way you were as a Nazir. So therefore, why can't he say that nullify her part, and his part will remain? Because when he says va'ani, he doesn't mean I want to follow you till the end, to your footsteps. I want to be like you in your original state of Naziris. So therefore, that's what he said. So he could keep his commitment and yet be made for his wife's commitment. But the fact that you say he cannot make for his wife's commitment, it's only because you feel that when a person says Hareini bikvayach, or you say Va'ani, you're basically saying, I want to follow in your footsteps till the end of the game. And whatever's going to happen to you happens to me. And that's why he can't release himself of his wife's neder, because automatically he's releasing himself. So the Gemara says, not necessarily. Therefore, you want to say that all this, he's trying to follow in her footsteps. He cannot undo the neder because same idea. That's the same idea. So the Gemara says, not so. He's trying to latch himself on to her original state. And technically, he should be able to be mefer her neder. It shouldn't affect his original commitment, but his commitment. But since since he says, I want to be like you, it's as if he's saying he's ratifying his wife's neder. Once you ratify saying that I'm okay with you being a Nazir, so then you can't retract that. You can't be made for it. Once you're makayim your wife's neder, there's no more power to the husband to nullify that neder. So therefore, if he goes to a rabbi and says, I regret ratifying my wife's neder, he could be mefer the neder. Then he's not going to, if he doesn't do that, he's not permitted to mefer his wife's neder. So it's no proof of what the person means when he says va'ani, when he says it doesn't. We don't know exactly when the woman says va'ani. Does she mean she only wants to be like her when she was in the original state, or perhaps va'ani means, or bikvayach means, I want to be and follow you exactly. What's ever going to happen to you should happen to me. And therefore, if number one eventually becomes mutter, perhaps woman number two also becomes mutter. That's unresolved. Basically, if someone were to ask you, Baal Megas guy is a Baal Mika or Kara, it seems from the Gemara that the Gemara says Baal Megas guy cuts the nether off. But it could be a machlokes in Tanoim. Some hold that mi'ika kare. That's also not definitive. One more piece of Gemara, another minute, and then we'll stop. The woman says, Hareini Nazir, va'at. And a man says, I want to be a Nazir, va'at. And then he says to his wife, and you? And va'amra amen. She says, yes, I'll also be a Nazir. Amen means like yes. So the Mishnah says, he could nullify hers, take away the Nazirs from her commitment, but his always remains because he says, I want to be a Nazir. So the Gemara says, Raminu, I will ask you a stira. There's a brisa that says, Hareini Nazir va'at. The same case. I want to be a Nazir, and he says to his wife, At, and you. Ba'am Ramein, she says, I want to be a Nazir too. Shneim Asurim. They're both Asur, and he cannot be made for it. It means that's what Shneim Asurim means. Ve'im Lav, if she did not answer Amen, Shneim Mitarim, then they're both permitted. Why is he permitted? He said, I want to be a Nazir. He said, when he said, Hareini Nazir va'at, he's saying that I want to be a Nazir only if wife, you join me in this adventure of becoming a Nazir. But if you're not joining me in the adventure of becoming a Nazir, then I don't want to be a Nazir. So fine, that's why Shnei Mutarim. But what you do see, if they both join in the adventure of becoming a Nazir, and she said yes, he cannot nullify that neder. So how does our Mishnah say that he could nullify the neder when he says Hareini Nazir va'at? Amar Rav Yehuda says you have to change the brisa. Tni, you have to change the brisa. Doesn't say Shnei Masurim. You have to actually read into the brisa to agree with our Mishnah that yes, he could nullify his wife's neder, but his would remain the same. But Abaye explains that it's not a stira to our Mishnah. I feel it brisa. You could keep the brisa the way it was written, and yet it's not a contradiction against our Mishnah because the Amar, like he's in the Bryce is talking about, he didn't say it in a question form. He said to her, Hareini Nazir va'at. We are both in it together. So you and I are going to be Nazirs. And she said, yes. The Kotali Nidroi benidroi. So his neder is with her neder. So therefore he cannot be made for her neder because by made for her neder, he's trying to undo himself. And therefore, once you have a commitment, you cannot do an action that undoes your own neder. You have to go to a rabbi, somebody else to do it. But what's our Mishnah's case? The Mishnah, we go up to another line. Umasnisa, the Mishnah's case is you're reading it wrong. Our Mishnah is talking about Kagoyin, the Oma Hareini Nazir. A man says, I want to be a Nazir. For sure. Me, I'm for sure a Nazir. Va'at, what about you, honey? What's the din? And therefore, she says yes. So he's separated. He's always going to be a Nazir. He's not dependent whether she's becoming a Nazir. She's asking her, do you also want to become a Nazir? But I'm for sure a Nazir. So Mishim Hachi Mefer Shalah Vishaloi Kayim. Therefore, he can nullify hers because it's not dependent on his. He will still remain a Nazir. And that's why our Mishnah since it was unpunctuated, they didn't read the Mishnah correctly. But our Mishnah basically said, Hareini Nazir Kama Va'at. What about you? Question mark. And that's how you read our Mishnah. Okay, Bez Hashem will continue tomorrow with the Mishnah on Daf Chaf Gimel.